Hey everyone, Dan here, and it's that time of the year again. Another season of Doctor Who has come and gone. I'm here to review it, and, well, in the immortal words of Nicholas Courtney...
Well, here we go again.
Yeah, that should set the tone for this review. It's not gonna be great. So yeah, season 2 of New Who, or series 15 of Doctor Who post-2005, or season 41 of the whole show? Basically, the 2025 season of Doctor Who, starring Ncuti Gatwa in his second and final series of the Doctor, and Vardha Sethu as companion Belinda, has just finished, and I don't know. I think this might be a video for another time, my feeling towards the show, maybe the kind of apathy that has set in, particularly with this series, that I'm feeling generally in, Doctor Who fandom. It just feels like the profile of the show has just fallen off a cliff. But yeah, this series, I don't know, it was decent, it was fine. It was definitely better than the last year's season, I think, definitely, but that's not really a high bar, if I'm being honest. Yeah, season 2 I think was definitely an improvement. I think there are some better elements, I think. I enjoyed a lot of the episodes in the season. I think there's a consistent run, like during the middle. I love Ncuti as the Doctor. I think he is great, and he gets more to do, I guess. I like Belinda. I think I liked how it was a bit different from Ruby. I did quite like the little story arc that was kind of threaded throughout of, trying to get Belinda home, and, it kind of linked the episodes together quite nicely. I thought that was quite a nice little touch. But I also just think the series just fell into the same trappings as last year. You had an opener, which I didn't like. You had a good run of episodes in the middle that I consistently enjoyed, and then it kind of fell apart near the end with a finale where you're just relying on a classic Who monster and unsatisfying resolutions to the story arcs, and it's like Groundhog Day. I'm repeating the same thing. It's just the exact same trappings and my exact same feelings, really. It's just not... It's weird. It's weird. I think I might do a separate video covering the Ncuti Gatwa era as a whole, as short as it is. I might do a video on that separately, but this is just focusing on season 2, which I do think is the better of the two seasons. I wasn't as disappointed as I was with last year's season, but even still, just the more I think about it, the more the kind of apathy of Doctor Who just kind of setting in. It was pretty much the same cycle, essentially, the same trappings, and I'm just not enthused by this version of the show, really. But let's get into the episodes, because overall, I think my negative feelings towards the series more comes from more broader things, but a lot of the episodes in the season were pretty good, so let's get to talking about something positive for once. So just like last year, the Robot Revolution, the series opener, was not very good, and I didn't like it. And I mean, admittedly, when I first watched it, I thought it was alright, it was fine, but thinking back on it, it is such an empty, hollow episode that I just feel nothing towards, and I didn't enjoy it. And honestly, I prefer Space Babies, even though Space Babies is crap, and really clear to see why it's crap. That one at least is memorable, and it is distinct, and it does have the odd few moments and ideas that I quite liked, but Robot Revolution just doesn't have anything of note. Like, it's the same old oppressed versus the oppressors kind of, pulpy sci-fi story that you kind of get in like the Hartnell era. We've seen that kind of thing before. And admittedly, the only thing I really did like is, the kind of vintage pulpy sci-fi aesthetic, the costumes of the characters and the design of the robots I thought was quite cool. There was some potential with some of the characters the Doctor was with. Like there was that one person who got killed off. But again, the fact that I can barely remember who it was, it shows how real of an impact they left. If they'd explored it, could have been very good, but they don't. This is also where we're introduced to Belinda, and I'll be honest, I was kind of conflicted on her in this story, because I appreciate the fact that they're doing something a bit different, a different dynamic to Ruby. It's a bit more confrontational, which I appreciate the difference, but I just think in execution, I don't know, I didn't immediately warm to Belinda in this story. And at times it really did feel like we were just copying Martha again, like RTD, try and create a unique companion challenge, impossible. I mentioned earlier like the unexplored and the underdeveloped. Let's talk about Al, the villain. Okay, first of all, the twist of he was actually the AI robot. I guessed it from a mile away, I remember, and also the whole AI Al name messing thing. It was the same thing they did with Sutek last season. I'm done with that. But also as well, through the character of Al, who was Belinda's clingy ex, we explore incel culture as a topic, and I think it's a valid thing you can explore. I think it's worth exploring, but I say that this episode doesn't really explore it. It's very much Al is just a straw man for the episode to take shots at and just dunk on completely. And it kind of feels a bit mean-spirited, I can't lie. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the episode should have sympathised with Al. I'm not saying that at all, because he is very clearly in the wrong. That's fair. But if you're going to explore that incel culture, explore what drives people to that lifestyle, what drives people to go down that rabbit hole and kind of go go down that path. What actually causes it? Kind of not sympathise with them, but understand them and show a bit of hope and whatnot. But the way that Al's presented it, there's constant shots taken, and also I think the main thing is how he's defeated. He gets turned into a sperm and then hoovered up. It just feels a bit mean-spirited, I can't lie. It just doesn't feel very genuine and authentic. In fact, the whole episode doesn't feel very authentic. I mean, I was saying the whole, pulpy 60s aesthetic and whatnot. I like that aesthetic, but if I want that, I'll go to one of the Harnell stories, like the Space Museum, or the bloody Keys of Marinus or something. Stuff like that, where it is genuinely really earnest, not like it is here, where it just feels so hollow and empty. So yeah, 3-4 out of 10. It's probably my least favourite of the season, because I just felt nothing to it. So going from possibly my least favourite of the season to my favourite of the season, Lux, which is just... I loved it. I unabashedly love this episode. It's not perfect. It's just a proper good, feel-good, fun Doctor Who romp. Very classic feeling. I actually watched this with my parents. The only one who watched the season live, and even they, who haven't really been keen on Doctor Who lately, they really enjoyed it overall. My dad was saying, it was nice to have a proper good villain again with Mr. Ring-a-Ding, who was brilliant. I love the animation, very Who Framed Roger Rabbit, with the kind of mix of that and live action. I love that. I love Alan Cummings' voice acting was fantastic. Great to see him come back to Doctor Who after the Witchfinders in the Jodie era. That was great. I mean, obviously I love 1950s, 60s kind of vibes anyway, so obviously set in Miami in 1952. I love the aesthetic, and it's so well realised, from the costumes, the makeup, the set design of the cinema, and all the lights, and even the fact that they're on location, it's more practical, not just like a green screen. It just felt more real and more tangible. Speaking of the 50s, I also like the fact that they obviously acknowledge the Doctor Companion's race, but I think it's done in a very thoughtful way, which is something the series has actually done mostly quite well, but I appreciate that. It wasn't overbearing, because that's obviously not what the story was about, but it would be dumb for them not to reference it, because it is set in segregation America, It also doesn't feel cynical or mean-spirited, I think it kind of... I do appreciate that, obviously, it's set at like 2 a.m, so obviously they can kind of get away with it, but people are scared, and they're going to kind of put aside their differences to just solve the problem of what's happened to the missing people in the theatre. I think that's just a really very earnest point, and when the Doctor said about hope of the site of the police box, I just think that's a really lovely earnest thing, and it just brings you back to like good old Doctor Who, really. I also really appreciate the subplot with what's his name, Mr. Pye, the projectionist. I thought that was very good. The kind of thing of the loss of his wife, and he kept the film reels. I think there's some interesting stuff on there of like what somebody means, like obviously once they're gone, kind of sort of distilled in film or in pictures, and kind of who they truly are. I think there's some interesting kind of theme that you can read into there. Obviously the whole meta stuff with the the Doctor and Belinda meeting the Doctor Who fans, that was really good. Actually, I really did like Belinda here. I think I'm really warm to her in this episode. And there's just a lot here that, there are things that you can digest, but overall it is just a fun, good romp, and 9 out of 10. I think of this era, this is probably the episode that I will rewatch the most. It's one that I can see myself going back to the most, because it is just pure fun, and I loved it from start to finish. The Well was also another cracking episode, and even though I do personally prefer Lux, this was again another kind of great episode, 2 back-to-back really strong ones. This is kind of where the series peaked for me, more broadly speaking, but yeah, The Well was fantastic. A very classic, very bread and butter style Doctor Who, in terms of, it's a claustrophobic, set in this kind of like space age sort of setting with, this kind of claustrophobic base in the siege kind of story, and it's a proper classic feeling Doctor Who story, but it's, there's a reason why that formula is blasted as long as it has, because it just works. And of course, it's a sequel to Midnight, the Tennant story, one of the most acclaimed, probably my favourite of the David Tennant era, and I was always a bit sort of sceptical of, there's certain Who monsters that, one-off ones that I've never wanted to see back. Sutekh was one of them, and they did that, and balls it right up, and that's the reason I didn't want it. And the Midnight Entity is one I was like, never bring it back again, because the mystery around that creature is why it's so effective. But I am happy to report that the mystery was still intact. I like how you never really saw it. You maybe saw like for a split second, like a flash of something, but you can never really make it out because it never lingered on that. And
I really appreciated that, and I still think it worked very well and was still a great antagonist. I thought Rose Eileen Ellis as the supporting character, she was really great in this episode, and I do think, again, the kind of, you know, representation of deaf people in the story was very well done. I think with her character, she was acted very well. The Doctor knowing the sign language was interesting, and even just they had the subtitles on the little screens. I thought that was quite interesting, and it made sense as like a futuristic setting sort of thing. It just made sense, like a nice evolution. And I think thematically, the whole thing of not turning your back on you know, on deaf people and those who are marginalised, I think it's interesting how that's kind of the case of you can't literally look back because the midnight entity will latch on somebody else, and I think that's again, it's weaving the, you know, real world allegory with, you know, your story. I think it's just knitting very well into the story and just works, I think. And also, like in this episode, some of the story arc sort of stuff with, you know, the fact that Earth isn't remembered because of the whole, you know, what happens with the story. But I like those seeds getting planted, even though it wasn't paid off particularly well, as we'll get to later. But I think that setup was quite interesting here in this context. So, but yeah, overall, it's not like a revolutionary episode, but it's just a really great example of, you know, as I say, bread and butter Doctor Who. So there's not really anything I can fault with it. I love the look, the vibe, the production design, the costumes, the set. It's just a great horror piece and just really solid stuff. So yeah, 9 out of 10. It's a low 9, but like, it's just great, and I can't really fault it. Lucky Day's a very interesting episode, and I'm a bit, I don't know, I thought it was a good episode, but I'm kind of conflicted on it as a whole, which is odd. I'm very mixed on it, even though overall I think it's a solid piece of writing and directing and drama. I just think I don't know. Obviously, this is a Doctor Light episode, which I think off the bat, because of how short this series has been and whatnot, and you had 2 Doctor Light stories last season, 1 this year. Again, it's like taking away time from Ncuti, you getting to know his Doctor and whatnot, so I'm not sure about that. And also I think, whilst I appreciate wanting to return back to Ruby as a character and kind of showing the impact that her life after the Doctor is, you know, that kind of impact of the Doctor on her life and how she's kind of coping afterwards, and I think some of that stuff is genuinely compelling. To me, it's also a double-edged sword, because it's almost like Ruby's never really left. I think her coming back in the finale, it's almost like, even though at the end of season 1 she left, it never felt like a permanent departure. It's just odd. It's just kind of odd, and it's felt like she's still kind of been here. I don't know, it's an odd one. But as to the overall premise of exploring Ruby's life after the Doctor, I think that's interesting. I love the setup with Conrad as a character, you know, this kind of podcaster, grifter, and you know, commenting on that kind of thing. I think it's interesting. I almost saw it as a sequel to, a sort of spiritual sequel to Love and Monsters, with people being obsessed with finding the Doctor after a chance encounter in that obviously story. And this obviously updates it with the kind of medium of podcasts and kind of, you know, that kind of spreading rumour and conspiracy and that kind of, it just updates that idea to a more contemporary setting, and I appreciate that. And the bait and switch, I think there are holes you can pick in it, but what I do love about it is it's all to do with Ruby's character. I think how betrayed she feels by Conrad, you know, he gains her trust and her charm and whatnot, and you know, the kind of rugs pulled under, and I think it's really powerful. I think knowing what we know about Ruby, I think it's just really powerful stuff. And as I say, Millie Gibson is fantastic, probably her best episode of the entire era, I'd say. I think where it starts to sort of get a bit clumsy is towards the end. I think with Unit, I don't mind Unit being involved, but I think the whole thing of, you know, Conrad trying to expose Unit as this organisation, and you know, they're kind of using that monster, but they kind of fake it. I don't know. I think the more I think about it, the less I understand it, which is I don't quite get what they were trying to say, and it's almost like just feel a bit one-sided. So Unit's very much not called out. I don't know. It just feels odd. I don't know. I don't quite get what the episode's trying to say in that kind of regard. But I think that's, yeah, it's a little bit confusing, a bit muddled. But overall, I think it's a solid episode. I'd probably give it a 7.5 out of 10, something like that. But as I say, like the actual character drama with Ruby, the kind of writing, directing, that sort of stuff, I really love it. It's more just in the last act where it just gets some, I'm not quite sure what we're trying to do here, but overall, I think it's a solid watch. The story in the engine is one that I would probably say it's the story in this season that I have the most respect for, because it's the most different, because it's a completely new writer to Doctor Who. I can't remember the chap's name, but I believe he's a theatre writer, and it has just such a different vibe to any other story I've seen in the show, and I really, really respect that. And it's a completely new take on the show that I would love to see a bit more of, to like develop it, to develop those ideas and that sort of vision of Doctor Who. I'd love to see this writer back, but overall, I do respect it a lot. I just think I need to rewatch it because I say it's very different. That I don't think I fully understood all of it, but that's more down to me. I think less so in the case of Lucky Day, it was more the actual plot that did need a bit of rewriting and retooling. But here, I think it's very much down to me. This is a me issue because again, I can't really fault the episode objectively. There's so much I love about this episode. I love the setting of Lagos in Nigeria. I love how the Doctor's race has been used in the era for the most part. I think Dot and Bubble and this episode use it very sensitively. I think this is probably the best example because, the Doctor having, now being black, having a safe space, a place where he can go and feel, like himself in this incarnation. I think it's a great move. I think it's a very thoughtful and just inspired thing. And, the barbershop setting I love, the kind of, it's a great setting for a Doctor Who story. It takes the ordinary and then puts a sci-fi twist on it. And the fact that this is it's a spaceship kind of thing and it's fueled by stories, it takes that everyday thing of barbershop chatter, which is a common mundane thing. Sometimes we'll get a bit wound up when the barber tries to make small talk to you, and it uses that and it puts a sci-fi twist on it, and it's what fuels the engine essentially. Yeah, I think that's just really clever and really, really inventive, and the way it's done, I need to probably again rewatch it properly, but I just think it's really clever. I think the Barber's a great kind of antagonist. I like how he's redeemed at the end. It was nice seeing the Joe Martin Doctor, the Fugitive Doctor. Yes, it was a cameo, and she got more to do, but it's nice seeing her again. Never not going to complain about that. And overall, it was just such an interesting episode that I do definitely need to give a rewatch. But overall, it's a really solid one. So 8 out of 10, I'm going to give it. It's a really, really solid, very fresh, unique episode, and this is what I'm looking for. I want to see a bit more of this, and it's a shame that we can't get any more episodes in the Shooting Out era like this because, well, he's gone. And this now remains as pretty much the last good episode of the era because the next 3... Oh, Christ. Right, let's just get this over with. Episode 6, The Interstellar Song Contest. I've been dreading talking about this story. This is kind of one of the reasons I have actually put off this review. This episode specifically I've been absolutely dreading talking about because the well has well and truly been poisoned with this one, and the atmosphere and the vibe around this one, just the discourse that spawned from it, I wish I didn't have to talk about, but it's just, I'm a reviewer, so I've got to. So obviously this is the kind of Eurovision homage episode and whatnot, so the Doctor and Belinda go to the Interstellar Song Contest, the 803rd or whatever, and the thing is, that's a fine setting for a Doctor story. I kind of wish they'd lean into some of the kind of campy element of it, but it's fun. Ryland's fun, even though I'm not really familiar with him anyway. That's fun. The hologram Graham Norton was quite fun. I wish they had gone a bit further with it. Did kind of what Rings of Acton does, really explore that world. Maybe we see some familiar aliens. That can be quite fun. Maybe I don't know some ood or something like that. I don't know. But as a pulpy, it turns into a bit of like a pulpy mystery thriller run around. And as that, which is a pretty standard Doctor Who formula, just with a Eurovision skin, as a pulpy Doctor Who thriller, it's fine. It's not groundbreaking, but it's fine. It's visually lovely. I mean, that one shot of all the bodies floating in space, that's a fantastic shot. Some great moments here and there like that. The Susan flashbacks, at the time I didn't mind them. I mean, I think the fact that it's not been paid off with the finale and whatnot, it does kind of dampen it a little bit, but you know what? I don't mind that. But it's with a couple of elements of this story that just really... So obviously there's the the Eurovision angle, and if you know Eurovision recently with the whole, Israel-Palestine stuff, it's been quite a hot topic, and the episode clearly wants to comment on that. Now, I'm not here to comment on that personally. I am not well informed enough, really, to be making comments on this sort of stuff. I'm going to keep out of that. But what I will say is if the episode wants to say something about it, which it has every right to, artists can do that if they want to, but you've got to be informed. As I say, I'm not going to be making comments about it because I'm not fully informed as I could be, so I'm not going to, but the episode clearly wants to, but it royally mucks it up, and it's really, again, really confused on what it's trying to say, a bit like Lucky Day, but here to a much more severe extreme, and it just, again, it's that discourse that spawns from that when your politics and your writing is that undefined and that messy and that sloppy, that's when you get a poisoned well of a discourse. And then there's also the moment where, at the end, with a kid who, he's the villain of the story, he wants to wipe out 3 trillion people with the Delta Wave. Yeah, he wants to kill them all through the song contest and whatnot, and the Doctor manages to stop him, and then tortures him via electric shock repeatedly. Which, again, at the time, I was kind of thinking, oh, this is like Shooty's time with Victorious. This is kind of cool and whatnot. Seeing a darker Doctor, you know, and kind of him being pushed to the edge. In theory, I don't necessarily mind that. But the more I think back on it, it just, no matter which way you slice it, it just doesn't make any sense. Because, yeah, it is really malicious. And it just, you know, the Doctor's often threatened to be, you know, unleash his anger and whatnot. You know, he's often threatened to do that, but he's never done it like this. It just feels really, yeah, it's like cruel. It's just really, really cruel when you think about it. It just doesn't sit right. And the fact that Shooty's meant to be the whole, you know, a more emotionally mature Doctor after, you know, Tennant came back as 14 and, you know, is that healing era, it's that Time Lord rehab, you know, with the Nobles, and apparently 15's meant to be all healed and emotional, that's why he cries and whatnot. It's, you know, it's like, if you're going to do that, why is he doing this? And he's really not held to accountable. I know there's the kind of thing of, you know, Belinda walks in and she's shocked and disapproves, and, you know, there's very minimal attempts to make it look like the Doctor regrets it, but it falls so flat. It falls flat on its arse and just isn't earned. And yeah, that's the more I think back on it, it just doesn't. No. And then there's the mid-credit scene with the Rani by generating. Mrs. Flood was the Rani. Oh, what a bloody surprise! And it's like, it's just. I actually laughed. It's like, are we seriously doing this? It's just ridiculous. Like, I don't know. But yeah, this episode I just don't enjoy talking about. And I wish I did, because it's like some of the, like, it's more so just little, like, moments, but those are really severe problems of the episode that they just bring the whole ship down of what could have been a genuinely fun pulpy thriller, which I enjoyed in the moment, but thinking back on it, I just kind of want to stay away from this episode now, which is a shame, but that's how I feel. And now on to the finale, which I was kind of cautiously optimistic about, because last season's finale was crap. And this one, right, so Wishworld, part 1. I actually don't mind this as a first part. I actually, you know, obviously it does very much rely on how it's paid off, and it's paid off in a piss-poor way, as we all know. We'll get to the reality war soon, but I actually don't mind Wishworld as an episode on its own. I do enjoy the vibe of, you know, comrades create this world out of wishes, which kind of a dystopian, I say dystopian, but it's like, you know, in his image, and it's this kind of, you know, 1950s, very stereotypical kind of, very traditional, you know, nuclear family kind of thing. I think it's kind of interesting. I love the whole thing of the slips when people maybe think about it and forget and kind of realise what's going on, and the cups slip through the table. I think that's quite interesting. It's quite visually distinct. And you know, all the cups in the bins and whatnot. There's very visual elements that I think are very striking and very vivid, and I really enjoy it. It's like UNIT being an office space and whatnot, and, you know, I think it's I don't know, it's just interesting. There's something quite surreal, and I enjoy that element of it. I do like as well the kind of base operations with like the bone structures. I think that's kind of cool. Yeah, visually this episode's very good, and I do like the vibe of this, you know, comrades world and the kind of thought. So I think could have gone further with it, but I appreciate that. There's some interesting ideas that I think, you know, it's a solid episode, and those elements do stand on their own in this part 1. But yeah, then we've got the two Ranis, and Mrs. Flood and the actual Rani. The actual Rani, I can't remember her name, but she does a very good job. I think she's pretty good in the role, and but yeah, and then there's a cliffhanger where the world's ending, and Omega's gonna come back next week, and I was thinking, oh boy. So yeah, overall it's a bit of a messy episode, but I do appreciate some of what it's going for, so I'll give it on its own a 6 out of 10. Why not? And then the reality war. Oh my days. This is the most recent episode of Doctor Who, and possibly the last we'll be getting in a while, because the show is in limbo at the moment, and that is a state that the show is in, and it's entirely of its own making, because this episode is shite. It's just complete gibberish, this episode is. And me and my parents, particularly my dad, we have this running joke of my dad just doesn't understand any Doctor episode that's on, and hasn't done for God knows how many years. And I'm always trying to be playing devil's advocate. You know, he didn't have a clue what was going on in 73 yards, and even like Lux to a degree, even though he enjoyed it. And I was like, no, it makes sense, you know, 73 yards, it's open to interpretation. And then this comes along, and I'm like, yeah, this is the first time I agree with you, because even I couldn't follow this, because it is just gibberish. It's just yapping, fan service, Omega, the Rani, all this just crap, and it's like, this isn't coherent at all. It's kind of entertaining in how crap it is, but it's still crap. Okay, we'll go over some positives. I do really like the resolution to the cliffhanger where Anita from Joy to the World, the best part of that episode, comes into the Time Hotel door and saves the Doctor, from falling through to the underworld thing. I like that. I like seeing Anita come back, and I do like a lot of having a lot of the characters from this era kind of return and come together in this episode with the whole unit family in that episode, and I quite like that. I do quite like that. I think there's some fun spectacle. I like the bit when Unit becomes this big like laser tower. That was quite fun. The Doctor zipping about on the little moped thing. That was kind of cool. I loved seeing Jodie Whittaker back, which I never thought I would say, but I actually really liked that scene towards the end. That was fun. She was great as usual, but I'm really clutching at straws because, oh man, some of the stuff in this episode. Right, so the Rani was built up as the big bad here, right? And she gets eaten by Omega. Okay, so he comes into the episode, and I kid you not, I literally said as he came out of that tomb, F off, that's not Omega, because he's this big skeleton thing. It's just like, that is not Omega. It's stupid. Why is he just a big CGI monster? It doesn't make any sense. It just butchers. I wanted Omega to come back, and now I don't, because this episode just ruined it. It's crap. And to do a whole metaphor with it is that how like Omega has kind of believed in his own hype, essentially, so he's become a god in a way, and he's so cumbersome that he can't get out of his tomb. He's like this decaying corpse that can't get out of his tomb and can't escape his own past. Isn't that an apt metaphor for the show at the minute? I don't mean to be snarky, but it's true. And Omega's in it for like 3 minutes, and it's comical how little he's in this story. And then Mrs. Flood, who's been built up since the goddamn start of the era, she just disappears. It's like, I'm out of here. And it's like, oh, okay, so what was the point of even caring? Like I even cared anyway, but like, what was the point? There was none. The whole stuff with Poppy, obviously from Wishworld, who, was the Dr. and Belinda's daughter, and, Belinda just gets stuffed in a box for the entire episode. Anita just becomes a human doorstopper, which is just, there is kind of some ironic enjoyment in this, but God, this is so sloppy. And the story just wraps up about half an hour in. It's like we've got a whole half-hour episode left, and it just waffles on. It just doesn't make any sense. They just genuinely, I can't make out what this is trying to do, but they rewrite history, and now Belinda's a mother to Poppy, which is just like, what's going on? Like, I feel like I barely know Belinda, and she's a completely different character here. It just doesn't, I don't know what's going on here. And then the regeneration, where Shooty regenerates into Billy Piper. Just why? Just why? It's just pathetic. I don't care of like, oh, is she the Doctor? Oh, do you wait and find out? I don't care, because it's just, it's desperate. It reeks of desperation and creative bankruptcy. I know people have probably said that already, but it warrants repeating. This is embarrassing. It genuinely is embarrassing. Doctor Who, if you keep doing this, keep relying on these one-off monsters from the mid-70s and 80s and bringing back characters actors from 2006, Doctor Who ain't gonna last. It's not. Genuinely talking about the reality war has knackered me already, because it's just gibberish. It's kind of entertaining and kind of laughable, which does give me some entertainment from just how bad it is. But it is an appalling finale. Empire of Death's pretty worse, but yeah, that's not like a high bar. That is really not a high bar. So this is my little ranking of the whole season of the 8 episodes. Lux is at the top, and followed closely by The Well. Those are the 2 episodes which are unanimously, I would say, fantastic across the board, and that I would probably rewatch quite often. But yeah, it's that middle chunk, those 2, and then Lucky Day and Storing the Engine, I think were very solid episodes, and I probably need to give them a rewatch. I didn't quite fully get them, but I respected a lot of what they were trying to do. And then the other half of the series is just crap. Genuinely is. And it's just, Robot Revolution is just such a nothing episode. Interstellar Song Contest, I don't want to touch that with a 50-foot pole. And the finale, again, is just comically bad. Of just how appallingly just laughable and stupid its creative decisions are. It's just, I don't know. I probably need to do a proper video breaking down where I'm at as a fan. And kind of like a retrospective on the Gatsby era. I think I probably ought to do that. But I'm just tired. I just am of Doctor Who, but yeah, I've been putting off this video for a few weeks, and it's just the fact, talking about some of these shit episodes, it's just, and apologies for swearing a lot in this video, but I'm just knackered of the show at the minute. I just need time to miss it, and I don't know, it's just been such a, yeah, just the aftermath of that finale was just something. But anyway, that's the end of my video, but I want to hear from you guys what you thought of the series, what you thought of these episodes, and if you enjoyed the series, more power to you. I wish I could overall say that I still really enjoy. I wish I could enjoy Reality War, genuinely, and Rogue Revolution. I know people quite like. Fair enough. I'm not here to take that away from you, but I always like to share my opinions on the show and whatnot. And yeah, sadly, I'm just not feeling it as of late. But I hope somebody out there is. So, but with all that said, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, click the bell so you don't miss a thing. And until next time, take care and have a nice day.
London 1965.